Hello everyone and welcome to Programme 2 of Primary Geography. Yeah, quite right. It's time to begin. So there's Bonnie and Maggie joining us as we begin Programme 2. And welcome back to the humanities in primary schools, especially primary geography, learning and teaching. And this is Programme 2, which again we're going to be exploring that theme of time. Time within geography, time within history, and within place and beliefs, but also particularly through things like the seasons, the weather, and climate. So, without further ado, welcome to Programme 2. This series of programmes combines history and geography and belief about what the land used to be like, what the land used to offer, and what was available to it. And although there's a focus within these programmes upon the national curriculum in England, it can equally apply to the curriculum for excellence in Scotland and also to the particular primary curriculums in Wales, Ireland, and further afield. This series of programs, they're not presented in any professional sense, as you can probably tell by the quality of the commentary. And also what it isn't here to do is tell trainee teachers or even qualified teachers how to teach. There's a certain element of what to teach, but there's a focus upon themes, and those themes of time, of place, and of belief. So you've got all sorts of things there. So it really isn't about you need to teach this and this is how you teach it, but it's looking at themes of outdoor learning, of inquiry-based learning, of health, of well-being, and what it means to be here and the stories that we can tell. Stories based maybe upon the kind of history that's happening, like the Sheelings that we've got here up in the Central Highlands. But if you're wanting something to say, well, this is what you should be teaching and this is how you should be teaching it, there are numerous websites out there that will help you. So here we go. On with the programme. Welcome. As I said in Programme 1, the great words of Barack Obama there, the study of geography is about more than places on a map. It's about understanding the complexity of our world and appreciating the diversity of cultures that exist across the continents. And in the end, it's about using all that knowledge to help bridge divides and bring people together, to bring them together in a common purpose. And part of today's programme is looking at one of the most pressing of those common purposes, and that's understanding the climate crisis and climate change and what we can do and how we can help to move things forward in a positive way through proactive action. So we're going to start very shortly with weather and moving through the seasons and concluding with climate, because these are all things that change over time. Weather is something that is familiar to the children. You step into many a classroom, particularly with the younger children, and you will see something like this. You see a weatherboard, and the day may well begin with a discussion about what the weather was like the night before, or what the weather is like that morning, what kind of clothing we might need to wear if we're going to go outside during the school day. And it might also be starting to think about patterns to the weather, patterns to do with the climate, but also patterns to do with the seasons, to do with the time of year. And clearly this is something that is a key thing that we look at within school. And as I said in programme 1, it really is about practical activity, giving the children the chance to observe, to reflect, and to record. And here you've got a young gentleman who is observing using a weather station that has been set up in the school grounds. But the children may also decide that they would like to make their own weather gauges, whether it be for the rain or an anemometer for measuring wind speed, and using those at home to look if there are differences in the weather at school and at home, for example, and again to look for patterns. And this is something that's probably a little bit more advanced, but you might go into some schools and they're using data logging devices and they're using IT in order to map the weather, not only further afield, but also within their own locality. And using a variety of different devices, again, it's mapping that weather over time, it's seeing changes, it's looking for patterns. And this could be used across a range of different topics, not just geography or the humanities, but it can also be brought into things with a common theme, or you might want to integrate it with subjects such as, for example, maths and science. And again, as you well know, in the UK, we have a preoccupation with discussing the weather. It's almost a feature of many a family's day that they sit down at some point during the day to catch up with the weather forecast. And it's almost one of those discussion points that particularly the older you get, it's normally something that is a feature of the conversation within about 3 sentences of meeting someone. And again, this is another example of the kind of weather chart that you might see in many a primary school. And so it's about, what do you need to know? What's the difference between weather and climate? And clearly this brings us back to that theme of time. Weather can change on a daily basis, but it can also change by the minute and by the hour. Here in Scotland, we talk about the fact that sometimes we can experience all 4 seasons in a day. Such can be the change of weather and the speed at which that actually happens. And of course, we talk about hot places and cold places. So we talk about the stability of weather, the patterns that we might associate with a particular location, which in itself can be a feature of climate. So climate, if you like, is a precursor invariably to the kind of weather that we would expect to experience in a given location. And of course, we also associate weather with the seasons. And it's only when we have changes in the expected weather. So if we get snow in June, for example, or even in August, as I have been known to experience, then it's seen as something that is out of the ordinary. And that flies in the face of both our expectations and patterns that we might expect within the weather. And starting points with children, clearly in the previous slide, there were weather symbols. You might want to move on to other weather symbols that would be seen in a media weather map. But it's about the children observing and recording the weather conditions and thinking about the effect of this on human activities. particularly if they're going to go out into the school grounds or further afield to study different aspects of the environment. Children invariably make weather instruments and they're used to recording the data in very rudimentary ways, or even in the more advanced ways that we saw using data logging and IT. And of course, then it's leading on to patterns, comparing our weather with weather conditions and changes to patterns around the world, but also thinking about unusual weather conditions. What might have caused that? Is it something that was avoidable? Is it due to human impact? And what were the effects of that? And how can we avoid such things happening again in the future, particularly if it's due to the human geography side of things over the course of time, rather than necessarily physical or natural geography. And as well as starting points, you can look at stories involving weather. And here we've got Katie Moregg's Rainy Day book, but you can find lots and lots of books involving weather, stories involving the weather, and the children can talk about where those stories are set and the kind of weather and whether that weather, if you pardon the pun there, was there a pun? No, there wasn't, probably not, but there you go. But you can think about the key geographical terms, and again, it's if you're looking at stories from around the world and different weather conditions and maybe weather catastrophes and things like that, how does that compare with where the children live? So they're making local and global comparisons. And of course, misconceptions, variety of misconceptions. Excuse me. I would draw your attention to the I'll draw your attention. I've just stopped there because I've just had a very good cough. As I said, it's not overly, it's not meant to be professional or a David Attenborough voiceover here. So I would draw your attention here to the Geographical Association. They have a fabulous website, and what they do is they give you ideas for your own continuing professional development. But there are a whole range of resources that you could use within your classrooms and within outdoor learning to be able to really develop engaging teaching and enthusiastic learning. And I love these two. I love these two pictures here. We've got a couple of young children here who've decided to create their own news broadcast and their own weather forecast. But again, you've got another example of a weather station that the children are able to manage and have access to on a daily basis. So let's think about the seasons. We talked about the weather changing over time. The children will be able to discuss with you the kind of changes that they associate with the different seasons, changes to deciduous trees here being one particular example, but they might talk about the types of weather, but also you can draw their attention to things like animal activity, kind of shelter, kind of food that animals might have access to. So don't just limit it to the geography side of things, but think about nature, think about wildlife. The children themselves may wish to do things to help support the local wildlife. One of the classic examples are bird tables, bird feeders, nest boxes. And clearly, if children are going to experience the seasons, let's get them outside. Make sure they've got the appropriate clothing in school, but wet weather, windy weather, puddles up to your ankles, or in this case, up to your knees. Let's get out and experience. And the children will remember that. And I think this is a key thing here. And it's not just with the younger children. We tend to think, oh, it's the 5 and 6 year olds that will be most engaged by this. But if you're giving your 10 and 11-year-olds the chance to get outside, ask their own questions, maybe think about sites where they are going to put things like bird feeders, bird tables, and nest boxes, you'll find that they are very engaged and very involved in that. I visited a school in Jura up on the west coast of Scotland, and in their cloakroom they not only had the Wellingtons and their wet weather gear, but they also had wetsuits as well. So that whatever the weather, they put their wetsuits on and they could go outside and really explore the local environment at different times of the year. And sometimes it was so windy when they went out, they had to hold each other's wrists to stop themselves being blown over. Health and safety nightmare, I hear you say, risk assessments, but the children loved it. And again, it's a source of so many things, not just geography, but stories in English, things to do with science, music. They can bring music and drama into all of this as well. And of course, there we go, different ways the children might record using photographs, using video as a way of showing changes during the seasons and particular patterns. It's about them finding these patterns and observing these changes over time. It's not something that we just do on a Monday morning and then we don't think about it for another year. It's part of their ongoing experience as they develop and grow. And again, the children will actually record in different ways here. We've got some artistic ways of doing this. There might be things that they can collect from the natural and physical environment to use within the area of art to be able to show again how things change over time. There's music, as I say, drama that again we can associate with this. You might actually get the children to develop their own weather forecasts and, as we saw in the previous slide, present their weather forecasts in a way that's both entertaining and interesting. I love this quote. Childhood is a state of mind which ends the moment a puddle is first viewed as an obstacle instead of an opportunity. There was another quote that I saw many years ago, and it said, children's creativity is only limited by an adult's enthusiasm for clearing everything away. So look at these puddles, look at the changes in weather, look at the different climatic features as an opportunity to get outside so the children can observe changes over time. And I talked about nature, I talked about the wildlife, but also it's about those changes during the course of the year that you'll see amongst trees and plants, seeds, and in this case, cones that are produced by certain evergreen or coniferous trees. There'll be the blackberries, raspberries, all the different seeds and fruits. Let's go and have a look at fungi, at mushrooms and at toadstools and all those lovely slime molds and rusts and mildews that you can find. Of course, there's always the health and safety element of things, and we act in loco parentis, in that we have put into place safety measures that are above and beyond what any competent parent would be expected to put into place. So we have to think about the clothing. And again, that's key. It's something the children can plan with you. They can plan what kind of clothing they need according to the changes in the weather and the seasons. If you are going out and about on a winter day, then it might be that you've done some cooking to make soup or to make sandwiches and things that they can take with them whilst they go out and about and they explore. Clearly, there are items that will be poisonous if they eat them, and again, that's part of the growing up process. It's part of discussing that with the children so they are aware of the dangers and they treat the environment and certain things within it with the respect that is most assuredly needed. This is a local patch in autumn, and we can already see signs of change. And I think one of the things it'd be nice to do with your class or with your school, if you haven't got a particular school grounds that are rich in trees and plants, then it's a good idea to find a local patch that you can use and that you can visit on a regular basis to take measurements of the weather or to see the changes with the seasons. So that's one thing that you could actually do. And it's up to the children to think about how they would like to record those particular changes. Changes associated with the weather, but changes that you might see amongst the different flora and fauna that that local area supports. And again, it's about regular visits. I keep saying this, but get the children outside, get them experiencing, get them finding out things for themselves. And as you can see here through some of the slides that are about to follow, the children absolutely love this. You can be having all sorts of conversations with them, but let the children ask their own questions. It's their education, it's their learning. And we have curricula in place that say children need to learn this, children should be finding out about that. And this isn't at the expense of the children's fascination, their curiosity. It's all about them asking the questions and you helping them to find the answers to those particular questions. And again, if you're out there at different times of the year, making sure they're all dressed up nice and warm. I worked in a school where snow was a reason to be outside. It was a reason to dress up warm. It was science. It was exploring the snow. Why does the snow melt? Why does it become compacted over time? Why in some places do our hands feel warm when we put it into the snow, even though the snow is clearly very cold, but our hands are getting warmer? Why do we wear hats? Why is it important to wear hats when we're out in the snow? What about the clothing? What about the materials? What kind of materials would not really be good for wearing in this particular kind of weather or other different types of weather? And the children might want to actually have a go at designing not only the kind of clothing that they should be wearing in different weather conditions and during different seasons, but also about shelters how do the animals adapt to this kind of environment? Here we've got children who have adapted for that particular moment. But what about those that live in snowy conditions or that live in temperate climates where they have to adapt to the changing weather, be it shelter or food or competition? And again, just repeating the same point here. Yeah, the children will get wet. They might get a little bit cold, but that's what you've got a warm classroom for. It's what you've got radiators for. We always used to have hot chocolate on standby or some other kind of hot beverage if they preferred it, but just something so that when they go back inside, they're warming back up, they're discussing their experience, they've got hot chocolate or hot juice or whatever it might be, but something that really adds to part of that experience and part of the fun. And these are moments that you can't get back, but they are absolutely priceless moments, especially when they're captured in photos like this. And again, when we're inside as adults, we look outside and we think, oh no, it looks wet and it looks windy. But as we say here in Scotland, there's no such thing as bad weather, only the wrong clothing. So your confidence, your enthusiasm is key here. Get the wet weather gear on, get your wellies on, and get outside and lead those children in enjoying the environment that is part of them and that they are part of. So a little bit more about the seasons and the climate. One of the things here, clearly, these two girls are having the most wonderful time, but clearly make sure that your parents are aware that you're doing this kind of thing and that you're on a regular basis. You might be out in the school grounds, whatever the weather, and just ensure that the children have got changes of clothing, because there's always one that is going to end up absolutely soaked or covered in mud or for whatever the weather might throw at them suddenly, be prepared for, basically. And I'm sure you've all met the particular child that you know is going to come back, as I say, covered in mud or completely soaked. However, they might have had the most fantastic time learning about everything that is around them. This is one of the things that, although 10 years ago, children might have found the difference between weather and climate to be a difficult thing to understand. I think, given that we are now in an era where children are more and more aware of climate change and the climate crisis, this idea that climate is about patterns within a particular area and how that is changing and the impact it's having upon human survival and upon nature, then you might well find that your children are more able to discuss what climate actually is and why climate is important, particularly stability, and not having major changes to things like the air temperature over time or the reduction of ice and snow cover, or even increases in things like hurricanes, tornadoes, storms, and cyclones. And again, it's about talking with the children about how we measure weather, what weather usually revolves first of all around the temperature, and then it revolves around the amount of sunshine, and then the amount of precipitation. So whether that is rain or snow or sleet and hail, it might be whether we've got mist or fog and what the difference is between the two. And as I say, again, children are more and more aware of the fact that climate is a pattern of weather in a particular area. And usually that's over 30 years or more. Now, clearly, with our children, the oldest they're going to be is 11. So 30 years feels like a long time, but we can look again in a very positive way at changes that are happening around the world caused within the geography, within the human, natural, and physical geography by changes to the climate. And what are the factors within human geography, because they're the main causes that are leading to climate change? What is the impact? Now, that in itself might sound quite negative, but approach it from a positive point of view that we need to understand what the changes are and how those changes have been caused, and particularly through human environment interaction. And therefore, by understanding the science behind the geography, behind the climate changes, we can then determine positive action. What is it that we need to do next to make a difference? And I'm not going to read this to you, it's all there, the different types of climate, but where I'm broadcasting from at the moment, we're within a temperate or moderate climate. I'm very lucky. I've managed to visit all of these different types of climate: polar, dry and arid, continental, and tropical. And again, it's about the children thinking about the differences and their expectations. What would you expect to see in terms of, for example, the weather, the seasons, and the conditions for nature and for humans within these particular types of climate? And here's a few examples here of some activities relating to climate and weather. And I've included this picture for a very simple reason of children are fascinated by the types of tree and the names of different types of tree. How can we identify them according to their leaves, according to their seed types? But it's about helping the children using whatever means, using books, using internet guides, using identification guides that the children produce themselves, or using scientific keys to be able to identify and to be able to name the most common types of tree, of wildlife, of plants, even of the different types of fungi, of the mushrooms and the toadstools. And again, you can come back to this idea of safety and what we should touch, what we can touch, what we should leave well alone. And again, you can produce this in relation to birds, in relation to pond life, to insects and other invertebrates. Really, the ideas are up to you. Great teaching, I was once told, is 90% inspiration. And I think this is the key thing. It's knowing your children, knowing what enthuses them and engages them, and actually working with them to develop learning activities that make a difference to them, that help them to develop their knowledge and their understanding, and to be able to apply that within a range of practical, relevant activities. And so, as we come into the final section, it's drawing all of this together. Weather, seasons, and climate change over time. And time has been the theme for this programme and for the previous programme. But ultimately, the weather, the seasons, and the climate, they have an impact upon nature and wildlife. And thankfully, we're finally starting to listen. even though this is something that has been really part of the agenda within science, geography, and the environment since the 1950s, if not earlier. Back in the 1940s, there was a conservationist called Frank Fraser Darling who was talking about the impact of humans upon nature, regeneration, and the climate. In the 1950s, we had Gerald Durrell, who you will have heard of from the ITV programme The Durrells. He set up Jersey Zoo, but he was talking about human impact and the need for conservation and the need to develop the world and its habitats for the benefit of nature and the survival of humans. And then in 1969, we had the publication of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And if you haven't read that, I do recommend it to you. It's a book that was actually said to be ahead of its time. It was actually 20 years after the time when the talk of conservation had already happened. We are now starting to listen. And there are those that have made a difference out there, such as David Attenborough, for example, but children are leading the way. And we need to work with our children to help make a positive difference, not to be seen as the obstacles or the barriers. Our children in school look to us to be role models, and that includes within how we take positive action within the environment. And again, some of you may actually have been involved in the school strikes for climate. And this is something that is thankfully not losing momentum. Every Friday morning in the middle of Oxford, there is still the school strike for climate. And I'm delighted to say that that is going on not just in Oxford, but all around the world. And the children are very, very passionate about this. But it's not just making the politicians listen, but it's also the children want to take positive action as well. They want to do something. And when you look at these photos, clearly they have got adults with them. And yes, they need to have adults with them because it's all part of the guardianship that parents offer. But these parents are, if you like, giving their permission for this to happen. And they are as enthusiastic and they want to make a difference, not only for their children, but for future generations as well. And there are a whole range of websites that you can access. National Geographic Kids is a great one. Climate Kids through the NASA website, the Eyes on the Earth, really good. But that's just two of them. There are so many out there that you can find. And if you find ones that you think work, share them. Let other teachers know what is out there so they can be using the ideas as a springboard, as a starting point for developing meaningful and engaging learning activities, not just in the classroom, but out and about in the environment that the children want to conserve and develop. And I've just included this because I've recently been to the wildlife park, the Highland Wildlife Park up in the Central Highlands of Scotland. And the polar bear is now becoming known as one of those keynote species whose environment is changing. And it is changing due to this climate crisis. But it's getting the children to talk about the changes that are happening. We can't ignore them. We can't be the ostriches with their head in the sand. But it's then taking it forward and saying, well, what can we do to make a difference? And it might be that the children set up a mind map. This particular mind map has been developed for teachers and by teachers in terms of giving some ideas for the kind of things that can be done. But clearly it's about making things happen. And here I've just got a few examples of some of the things that have particularly that I've done with groups over time. I mentioned in program 1 that I used to run a science and outdoor learning club, and these are photos of some of the things that we did in response to conservation and the need for climate change activities. So we've got children there with their life jackets on that are about to go out on a boat. They're off to observe and record grey seal numbers, but they also, as part of that, landed on an island in order to undertake different conservation activities. We've got young Tom to the right there. He's making bird tables and bird feeders. If we continue to go clockwise, there we have Ben and Peter, who I've let loose with hammers and nails, and they've just stopped for a moment there because they've been helping to make fencing to conserve a particular area on an island that was being grazed quite extensively by sheep, and we wanted to develop that as a wildflower area where particularly invertebrates could thrive, but also there were a lot of voles in that particular part that we were trying to conserve. Clearly there's health and safety involved there to a certain extent. They're wearing gloves. They did, for the photograph, they put down their safety masks, but during that particular hammering they would have used their goggles. You've got a group there with binoculars and with their telescope. They've been out bird watching, but they've also been out looking for marine wildlife as well. And on one of these particular occasions, we were fortunate enough to be able to see a pod of killer whales going past. Thankfully, we weren't in that particular boat. We were actually out on the island observing. And yes, I know you've got that question in your head. Just looking, that is me in wellies and almost looking as if I'm addressing the League of Nations there. But we're out on a conservation activity. We're talking there about the health and safety aspects of what we're about to do. And so in itself, it is about getting the children out there and getting engaged in different activities. Here, this is the morning after a residential, and the four gentlemen here, they've got up fairly early. This is about 5 o'clock on a summer's morning. The previous night they set up a moth collecting device, and here they're counting the number of different types of moth and they're identifying those different moths. And we visited again over time to see if there were changes in the numbers and the different types of species according to the season and the weather conditions. So really get the children out there, get them looking, decide what it is that you want them to do, but at the same time, get the children to ask their own questions and to investigate things for themselves. So, thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you all, and thank you for joining me today, and hopefully we'll see you all soon.